All right, so we're starting to transition right on over into Just Talking, where our guest is an actress and she's a social media personality. We got the one and only Elizabeth Rogliani. How's it going, my friend?
Hold on, I don't see her yet. There she is.
There she is. How
Hi.
you doing?
I'm good. How are you guys?
We are fabulous here in SoCal, California. It's nice and hot and sunny. I'm wondering if it's the same way over there in Miami. How are you guys doing?
I think so. Yeah, it's pretty sunny today.
You haven't looked outside yet? You've been just
I haven't
locked
looked
into your four
outside.
walls?
I'm in my cave right now.
I think everybody's sort of bunkering down, right?
Exactly.
But let's get right on into it, because I know you went into a viral sensation a couple weeks ago, especially with your viral TikTok video. And the first thing that I want to address with you is because you could have spoken up about anything. Why did you want to speak up about cancel culture now?
It just started to feel very totalitarian. You know, one side that I felt like the cancel culture was coming specifically from one side. And I felt like right now it was a very important year when it comes to politics in the US. And I feel like if things go wrong, if power gets into the hands of people that are totally happy to cancel everyone else for their opinions, then we could find ourselves in a situation with a totalitarian in the higher office or in governmental power. So that's when I started feeling like maybe I should just say something, even though I didn't really think it would go far.
Yeah, right. But you just said something that's kind of fascinating that I've never really heard anybody say when they talk about cancel culture. They say, I've noticed a trend of a one-sided argument when it comes to cancel culture. What do you mean when you say the one-sided argument?
Well, it does seem that cancel culture is very political and very cultural and it's against one side of the aisle when it comes to politics. Anything that's more conservative and whatnot. I follow a lot of people that are conservative and left leaning, both on Instagram and Facebook and whatnot. And generally, I disagree with a lot of people, but I don't go after them. I am like, okay, let them do their thing. But if I start saying things, or if I see my friends start saying things, or even when I go and look at celebrities and whatnot, I do feel like the ones that are getting attacked are the ones that are saying anything that's more conservative or more traditional.
Right. And I feel like a lot of the times it's like you kind of saw the move yesterday, especially in New York with de Blasio. He painted Black Lives Matter in front of Trump Tower. And I think a lot of the issue that people are having is with this, I call this cancel culture, because that was one of the most saltiest moves I've ever seen in my life, because there are so many Americans in this country that want law enforcement to be held accountable, yet we got our politicians that are feeding into the cancel culture, and they think just painting signs in the middle of the road, which is tax dollars, by the way, it doesn't serve anything for anybody. It serves no one. And when you see this happen around the country, does this reflect on anything that you've seen in the past? Because I know you're born and raised in Venezuela. Was there anything of these kind of notions happening at the time when they had a transition of power?
I do see some parallels. I mean, the statue thing was the one that I was thinking, you know, this feels really familiar. And I know people think it's no big deal, but as soon as I saw the statues of Columbus going down, I remember the statues of Columbus going down there because it was a cultural thing. They were using kind of the indigenous population of Venezuela to say, you know, everyone else was oppressing them. And they're sort of used as these pawns, you know? And I felt, you know, these are not the only statues that are going to come down, because they went for Columbus, they went for Confederate statues, which I wouldn't necessarily say, you know, Confederate statues have to stay up, but I do think it should be a democratic process. But instead, what we have is mobs like knocking them out all over the place, and politicians appeasing them, right? And as Winston Churchill said, a appeaser is the one who feeds a crocodile, hoping it will eat him last.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
I mean, you kind of answered my question, because I know you literally said, quote, in your viral TikTok video, I had a lot of friends who told me it's just a Confederate statue. And I said, no, it's not going to be just a Confederate statue. Just wait and see. This is a slippery slope. But some people would argue with you saying, how are Confederate statues part of the U.S. identity? Because some people would say hip hop's been around longer than the Confederacy, or Barack Obama's term's been longer than Confederacy. What do you say to those individuals who challenge you on that notion?
I would say, again, it's not like I'm necessarily defending the Confederate statues, but I think it should be a process of democracy. If the city asks its citizens, "You want to remove this or not?" If the citizens say yes, then there you go. But a mob knocking them down is a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
And not to mention, I was talking to my family about this, and they were mentioning the rule of war, which is you honor that one which fell in the war. So in a way, I find that interesting that you don't necessarily put them down, but you say, you know what, you lost, but now you're with us.
Well,
So
but I'm going to slight on here. I understand honoring someone who fell. Confederacy lasts 2 years. It was to break up America. I don't know about I agree with the democracy part about voting them out, putting them into a museum, having it as part of it. But the Confederacy that is being fought for, those statues were erected in the Jim Crow era. They were erected specifically to promote a white heritage. I mean, the guy that had the Confederate flag, who made the Confederate flag, specifically said it is for a white people. And I think that's where I see what you're saying about honoring who has been and before, but I think Lamb of God had the great part about putting them into a museum and having it like this is what was happening now with the graffiti, with the torn down, and still not letting the statues go into a dusty bin. You know what I mean? But now recognizing where is it going.
I agree. I didn't really know the history of the statues, but I did feel like the people that were knocking them down weren't necessarily the most versed in U.S. history.
Agreed.
And which is why we're seeing the destruction of other statues, including
the elk,
Spanish writers.
Or how about the elk in Portland? They took down an elk, a statue of an elk in Portland. Don't know why.
Exactly. Well, that was the weirdest thing. Honestly, my mom this morning asked, like, why don't they go after the bean in Chicago? I'm like, why would you go after a bean? But again, I mean, I think for me, the problem is that when you have a movement that is basically political, because I would say Black Lives Matter has already admitted Marxist, and I saw the founders go over to Venezuela and like dine with people there and say that Venezuela is a place of intelligent political discourse. When you have the founders of that movement, the leaders, and I know people say there's no leaders, everyone's, this is a communist utopia, but that's just not the case with an organization that is receiving millions of dollars in donations. And when you have that organization kind of, organizing these protests, and you have people running around knocking down statues of founding fathers, of like Spanish missionaries, just every statue they see, Mahatma Gandhi, I think they knocked down a statue of him.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also like Arthur Ashe, they said this week. He was the first black Wimbledon winner, and they wrote White Lives Matter on it. And I 110% agree with you, Elizabeth, where there needs to be a democratic process. If they actually want to take down these statues, we have to do it the right way. There is law and order in this country, and Americans need to realize that specifically. But you were just definitely touching on, I think, is a really crucial thing that I know a lot of millennials embrace a lot in this country. And is there a difference between European socialism versus, let's say, Venezuelan socialism? Because there's a lot of people deciphering socialism, and I have a feeling you're going to say something else.
Yeah, because we real quickly, before you answer, 43% of millennials are for European socialism. And this is so I want to hear the difference. What is the difference? Is there a difference?
Yes, I mean, the thing is, European countries are not socialist. There is a myth about European socialism because they have free healthcare in a lot of cases, and there's a large welfare state in, for example, Sweden and Denmark and Norway, but they're not socialist. In fact, in Scandinavia and Sweden, they have a freer market economy than in the United States. So in a way, that the capitalism there like subsidizes the large welfare state and the high taxes, and that all happened very organically. It happened after Sweden, for example, was very wealthy economically before it started, their welfare state. And you also have to take into account the culture of the country, because it was very homogenous, and it was a culture of high trust and high cooperation. But then you have a lot of people coming into the countries that aren't necessarily the same culturally, and now they're starting to have a lot of problems with crime and people taking advantage of the welfare state. Not to say that all immigrants are, no. I'm an immigrant myself.
Yeah.
But the culture does influence a lot when it comes to these things. And socialism, and the first rule of socialism is that the government takes control of the production. This is not the case in Sweden or.
Well, we noticed how reliable the government has been during the coronavirus, so you can
why
only
would you
imagine what would happen with socialism.
And Elizabeth,
Why
on
would
one
you
of your
trust the government to do
interviews,
that?
yeah, Elizabeth, one of your interviews you gave out about where the statue taken down is kind of the following the footprints of Venezuela. You talked about how Venezuela, Chavez rewrote the Constitution to be similar to America. And then, because he had the separation of powers, but then he went in when the Supreme Court was no longer voting the way he wanted. He just decided to change the Supreme Court. And to me, that was the beginning of the end of any democracy in Venezuela. And the Obama administration tried that. They tried to do exactly what Chavez was. We're seeing the Trump administration try. I mean, I'm just seeing it's like, to me, it's our government is almost trying to shoot themselves in the foot too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we had a separation of power. Obviously, it was easier to take down than American separation of power. So I'm putting some faith in the U.S. government, but you can still see there is an intention there. You know, if you just let it go, you know, it's not a big deal, and you just let them do their thing. Eventually, they'll make it happen, because they recruit all of these people, what they call in socialist revolutions, useful idiots that don't really know what they're doing. Like the people running around knocking down statues, they're like, oh, I actually didn't know what this was. You know, that those are the useful idiots of political movements, because they kind of use these crowds to change the system, and then they're like, oh, I didn't know this was the actual purpose that we were going for.
Yeah, why the Elks? Keep the Elks, okay?
Why the Elks? Why is it necessary? You just want to knock down all the statues
and you're just
a whole new country.
But it's not just the statues, it's just shops and looting and all the rioting that's going crazy.
Yeah.
And thank the Lord, it's slowly starting to die out. I'm hoping. But one thing I definitely wanted to address with you is, I know it's got to be pretty wild to get hit up by, let's say, someone like the Laura Ingraham show, and immediately, like overnight, have your video become a viral sensation. And I'm sure the listeners would love to know how that experience is like, actually, like, you know, being someone like yourself, a millennial on TikTok, and then randomly getting hit up by a major news outlet like Fox News to speak out about your life history in Venezuela. What was that experience like?
It was very strange. I mean, I had maybe started making political stuff on TikTok like a week before, and maybe I had TikTok like for 2 weeks at this point. And suddenly I have a bunch of my friends message me before Laura Ingraham saying, you know, Elizabeth, I saw your story, the video of you on Twitter. Is that you? And I was like, why are these people messaging me? I haven't heard from you in ages. And then suddenly I get that email from Laura Ingraham. I almost didn't do it because I felt like it was too much, but my family was like, just go and talk.
Why do you think it was too much? I mean, you were very vocal about it to be on TikTok. I mean,
I know, but
kind of
I was not prepared for like a national TV show. I was like, okay, I'll do my TikTok, and I didn't feel comfortable with my video going viral and all these people kind of having opinions about my life and who I was. Total stranger. So I felt, you know, this is getting a little bit out of hand. But you know, my family convinced me. I did it. I didn't know what I was going to talk about. I was like, oh, they're gonna email me the questions that they're gonna ask before I have. No, they said, oh yeah, we're gonna talk about your TikTok video. Then as soon as I go on, I mean, I just heard all of the sounds. I couldn't see anything that was going on the screen or that's why I think sometimes I see these people on news channels and they're looking up. I'm like, are they watching themselves at the same time? Because when you have the screen on the computer,
that's crazy. I totally thought people were watching themselves the entire time. I didn't realize it was a black screen. How?
It was a black screen. They just hear like crazy stuff going on. Like when they're showing like the videos of the violence, I could just hear it. It was very weird. And then she threw me the first question, and it was not necessarily related specifically to the video I made. So I was like kind of thrown for a loop there and like sort of recovered. But yeah, it was strange. It's not like so I give props to people that do this.
Well, I gotta say, you went very viral. You made it all the way to the West Coast, and I know tons of individuals that were sharing your video very much viral. And I've always wondered how a certain individual like yourself, you know, going from like a couple thousand followers to like tens of thousands of followers within weeks, do you feel pressure to always have to speak up now? Because you have become the voice for millennials.
Well, there's a lot of voices for millennials. Thank God I'm not the one. You are one.
You don't want to be a dictator. Elizabeth, you don't want to be a dictatatorship?
You're saying the Chris Collins show's a dictatorship, Marissa? We're being a voice for a generation. Let's stop playing, girl.
So many messages like, yes, keep going. And I'm like, I feel this pressure to keep going. I do think it would be a good idea to continue this year specifically. I think it's important that people actually inform themselves and read into history, because history, I think, shows us a better snapshot of what it could happen versus just reading what is happening day to day. Because if you can't draw parallels from other parts of the world where this kind of stuff happens, then you're just going to be totally uninformed. Like when my video went viral, I had messages from people from Hungary, from people that left Soviet countries, Cubans, people that like their parents left China, their grandparents. And they're all saying like, yes, we're also seeing the same parallels. And that's when I say it's not just like Venezuela and the US, they don't have the same system, of course not. But the way that this movements go are usually the same. So that's why I was getting a little bit worried, and that's why I think the video resonated with people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when it goes to 1 million that quickly, it definitely resonates with people. And you can know for sure that there's a lot of millennials out there that are definitely wanting to know your thoughts on numerous of issues. And I know one of the things Marissa was going to bring up. Why don't you bring it up right now?
Yes, because so we have so much political stuff happening. Sounds like comedy has died. So what I want to know are like, what are your thoughts on late night comedians becoming the face of the nation when it comes to politics? Because I'm missing the old comedy.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them, 5 out of the 6 of them are white dudes. Now they feel like they need to speak up. Don't you just have a feeling that there's no escape valve to just escape from reality for once? Do you think it's weird that people are going towards individuals like these late night hosts?
I don't know. Like, you mean like Trevor Noah?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Trevor Noah and any of them. I mean, well, Trevor Noah, I wouldn't say so much. I mean, his is the Daily Show. It's a political talk show. Yeah, but when you're talking about channels 2 through 11, like
Ellen
Jimmy Fallon,
DeGeneres.
Jimmy Kimmel, you know,
no, I don't think. I think it's great that they make jokes, and I think you should be allowed to make jokes against everybody, make fun of everyone, Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, liberals, everybody. The problem is sometimes people, like some comedians, are getting canceled for their jokes against a certain group of people. But I think people go towards these comedians because they want some relief of some kind. But I wouldn't recommend saying, you know, these are the people that we should listen to fully when it comes to politics. I mean, they're comedians. They're not political experts in most cases.
Well, that's why I guess I was trying to bring it up, because it's like, that's why I feel like these people need to remind themselves again. You were hired as a comedian, not to be a news anchor. I mean, because sometimes I feel like that's why people can't escape reality. And I think you're bringing up a really good point about how comedy people really construe the whole message, because you're in an auditorium to listen to comedy. You're not literally hearing them preach the truth, right? Exactly. But this was pretty wild, because I know the Hollywood Reporter, they had a comedy roundtable discussion, and I want to play you a clip right now because actor Kumail questioned Ricky Gervais during this roundtable thing about his controversial stand-up comedy style. So Marissa, let's play the clip.
But I think it's also important what the point of view or perspective on the taboo subject is. I think sometimes people just do shock to do shock, and I do think that stuff can cause actual harm in the world. I really do. I think there are jokes against certain marginalized groups that can actually hurt. So I think talking about taboo subjects is extremely beneficial, but I do think that the point of view you take on them is also important.
Of course. That's what I always say. Is there anything you wouldn't joke about? I say, no, it depends on the joke. An offence often comes when people mistake the subject of a joke with the actual target. And that's really important. And that's a really important distinction to make. But a big part of my comedy is saying things I do not mean. I say the wrong thing because I know the audience knows the right thing. And that's why they laugh.
I think it gets pretty bad when cancel culture starts going after comedians. Because I only imagine when Patrice O'Neill or Ralphie May were still around, or even the great legend George Carlin, what would they say to these morons that have started
How about Richard
culture?
Pryor?
Or Richard Pryor. Yeah, you're absolutely correct.
Comedy.
And so when you hear this, I mean, the only reason I wanted to bring this up during the show with you is, Elizabeth, is because, you know, Ricky Gervais, this is the man that was praised at the Golden Globes for giving that speech out going against the Hollywood elites. Now it's a Hollywood star going after across the pond. I mean, what are your thoughts on, you know, comedy now being reconfigured to fit the agenda of what this, quote, you know, cancel culture wants now?
No, I think comedy should exist with outside and inside the political realm. And it should be allowed to go after anybody it wants. Honestly, I think if the jokes are constructed well, they're usually, I mean, they've gone on after Venezuelans. I've heard comedians, I remember going to a few comedy shows, and they would ask where people are from, and I would say, you know, I'm from Venezuela, and people would say, like, they would say something about communism or socialism, and they would go after Venezuela, and I would be like, okay, but I wouldn't take it too much to heart. In general, I think it's funny when comedians use stereotypes to make jokes, because the audience should be smart enough to understand that sometimes the problem people are not smart enough to understand the difference between a joke and reality. But I definitely don't think anyone should be going after comedians. If the jokes aren't funny, they won't tell them anymore. If people are laughing, there's a reason. So I think they should be able to make those jokes, and if they don't work, you move on to something else. I'm not not an expert in comedians, but when I've noticed going to a lot of like early comedy shows in New York, like I will go to some bars that feature kind of up and coming comedians that are trying their jokes. If people don't laugh at this silly joke, they'll like strike them out, you know?
Yeah. And just like you said, the joke is bad. The joke is bad. So cancel culture needs to stop going after comedians. How about stop going after our art? I mean, I really want to smack the woman, what was it, Ruth Clemens, that's going after Cancel Hamilton. Here is someone who is putting theater on a platform that is accessible, that we are fighting for to keep theater alive. And it is a BIPOC cast. I mean, it is brilliant storytelling. And if you start going after art, that is exactly what regimes do. They go after the comedy, they go after the art to suppress that. And we need to be really careful about that kind of stuff. Art tells the truth. They put the lens on what society is doing or could be going towards.
Absolutely.
Exactly. I think, for example, I saw a tweet by AOC saying that cancel culture isn't real, something like if people choose to tune them out, it's just, you know, people choosing to not listen to this person anymore. But I just don't think it's as organic as she puts it. I think people are sort of trying to get people to stop watching that stuff, because if people stop watching Hamilton, that's fine. But the problem is people are actually trying to suppress Hamilton so no one will watch it, even though it's already popular.
Which is crazy, because we all know next year Hamilton's already going to win at the Emmys and the Golden Globes. It's going to be like the most hooted and raved about, and everybody's going to pretend that we even criticized a guy who was just trying to bring light to something I think is a powerful message. And if you haven't seen Hamilton, go ahead and check it out. But Elizabeth Rogliani, thank you so much for coming on again. I think you are a beautiful person, and I think you're bringing a powerful voice for the millennial generation. Thank you again, my friend.
Thank you, Chris. Bye, Marissa.
Bye. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Peace.